Who's the stupidest person you've ever met, and what story perfectly sums up their stupidity? It was a peculiar set of priorities that somehow managed to be both the most and least sensible thing about him, choosing family time over proving one of the most revolutionary scientific theories in history. What made James truly remarkable wasn't just his unique blend of financial chaos and scientific misconceptions. It was the absolute, unshakable confidence with which he presented his theories. He approached both his mounting debt and his flat earth beliefs with the same level of denial that a toddler applies to bedtime. His financial statements and his model of the solar system shared one key characteristic. They both existed in a reality of his own making. The last time I saw him, he was explaining to his daughter why the swimming pool water didn't curve with the Earth's surface. A lecture that was interrupted by a call from yet another debt collector. In that moment, watching him simultaneously dodge financial responsibility while teaching creative geography, I couldn't help but marvel at the human mind's capacity for compartmentalization. Sometimes I wonder if James ever managed to reconcile his flat Earth theories with his spherical debt pattern, or if he's still out there, dodging creditors while searching for the edge of the world. Though I suspect that even if he found it, he'd probably try to take out a loan against it. Story 31. The In-Laws Adventure. Picture this. My in-laws, bless their hearts, recently graced us with their presence, staying at a nearby Airbnb because our apartment was too small, and frankly, my mother-in-law's unique personality had a tendency to test the structural integrity of my sanity. What should have been a simple pickup turned into an epic saga that would have made Homer scratch his head and reach for a stiff drink. The drama began during what should have been an uneventful walk to my car. My mother-in-law, whose observational skills were inversely proportional to her ability to read social cues, spotted what most people would dismiss as unremarkable roadside debris, a crushed piece of metal. But in her eyes, this wasn't just any piece of metal. It was apparently the Mona Lisa of metallic amphibian art. "Look," she exclaimed with the enthusiasm of a child discovering Christmas had come early. "It looks exactly like a frog." Thus began an impromptu art appreciation session in the middle of the street, as she and my father-in-law engaged in a scholarly debate about the artistic merits of this flattened piece of trash that would have made art critics weep into their berets. They discussed its composition, its metaphorical significance, and its profound commentary on modern society with all the seriousness of curators analyzing a newly discovered Van Gogh. After finally coaxing them away from their street art discovery, a process that felt like herding cats through a fish market, we approached our parking spot. Now, you'd think someone who had been in my silver car countless times would recognize it, but my mother-in-law, in a display of spatial awareness that would have made a GPS system short-circuit, attempted to open the door of a random black car nearby. When I pointed out that my car was the silver one I was standing next to, she had the audacity to ask, with genuine confusion, why I was waiting by the wrong vehicle. The grand finale came when we reached my car, parked on a narrow, busy street. Instead of promptly getting in, they held up traffic while searching for something to wrap their precious frog in, completely oblivious to the growing chorus of car horns that was starting to sound like an avant-garde symphony of frustration. When I finally lost patience and started ushering them into the car like a frustrated shepherd herding particularly artistic sheep, my mother-in-law had the gall to quip, "You're talking to us like we're your 2-year-old son," to which I couldn't help but respond, with all the diplomacy I could muster. "No, my son is far more cooperative." And honestly, I wasn't even exaggerating. My toddler's tantrums were a masterclass in efficiency compared to this performance. The cherry on top. Once we finally got moving, they spent the entire ride home discussing potential display options for their found art, debating whether it deserved a place of honor on the mantelpiece or if it should be submitted to a modern art gallery. Meanwhile, I was contemplating whether it was too late to fake a car breakdown and call them an Uber. Sometimes I wonder if they ever did turn that piece of crushed metal into a gallery installation. Though I suspect if they did, it would probably be titled something like Urban Amphibian, a commentary on society's disposable nature, and sell for more than my monthly rent. After all, in the world of modern art, one person's trash is another person's treasure, especially if that person happens to be my mother-in-law. Story 32. The Conspiracy Theorist's Dilemma. Meet Sarah, my coworker whose grip on reality was about as firm as a politician's campaign promises. She was what you might call a conspiracy theory connoisseur, collecting outlandish beliefs like some people collect stamps, except stamps generally make more sense. Her latest obsession? The earth-shattering revelation that the government was using traffic lights to control our minds. Yes, you read that correctly. According to Sarah's meticulously researched theory, and by meticulously researched, I mean she spent countless hours watching YouTube videos made by people whose credentials consisted of having a webcam and too much free time. The changing colors of traffic lights were actually coded messages designed to program our subconscious minds. Red lights weren't for stopping, they were for subliminal government control. Green wasn't for go, it was for mind control. And yellow. Well, that was clearly a warning signal from the resistance. This wouldn't have been quite so problematic if Sarah hadn't decided to take action against this perceived threat to our free will. Her solution? She began treating traffic signals like optional suggestions, viewing them with the same level of commitment as a cat has to its owner's personal space. This led to several near misses and one particularly memorable incident where she almost collided with a police car, which she later claimed was obviously a setup by the Illuminati. The situation reached its peak of absurdity during our morning commute to work. I had the misfortune of carpooling with her that day, an experience that felt like being a passenger in a conspiracy theory theme park ride. As we approached each intersection, Sarah would close her eyes and hum loudly to protect herself from the government's mind control frequencies. This left me, the unwilling passenger, to frantically shout directions like some sort of anxiety-ridden GPS system. "Sarah," I'd yell, "red light, red light." "That's what they want you to think," she'd respond serenely, eyes still firmly shut. The resistance told me that if you drive through enough red lights, you break free from the matrix. It was around this point that I began seriously questioning my life choices and updating my will. The final straw came when she decided to liberate other drivers from their programmed behavior. This involved her standing at intersections during her lunch break, holding a sign that read, "Traffic lights are mind control devices. Wake up, sheeple," while wearing a tinfoil hat she'd fashioned from the wrapping of her morning burrito. The local police were, unsurprisingly, less than impressed with her one-woman revolution against traffic safety. When she was inevitably called into HR to discuss her concerning behavior, Sarah took it as absolute proof that she was onto something big. "Why else would they try to silence me?" she asked, conveniently ignoring the fact that almost causing multiple accidents might be a valid reason for workplace concern. The irony of it all. Sarah's crusade against traffic signals ended rather anticlimactically when she got a ticket for running a red light. The fine was so expensive that she could no longer afford her monthly subscription to Truth Seekers United, the YouTube channel that had started this whole mess. Sometimes the system works in mysterious ways. These days, Sarah has moved on to believing that pigeons are government drones designed to spy on us. At least this theory is less likely to result in vehicular manslaughter, though I do worry about the local bird population's dignity. The last time I saw her, she was trying to jam their signals by throwing breadcrumbs soaked in vinegar at them. The pigeons, displaying more common sense than Sarah, simply ate the bread and continued about their supposedly surveillance-heavy day. I often wonder if Sarah ever realized that if the government really wanted to control our minds, they probably wouldn't do it through something as obvious as traffic lights. Then again, maybe that's exactly what they want us to think. Great, now she's got me doing it too. Story 34, The Substitute Teacher's Nightmare. As a substitute teacher, I thought I'd seen it all until I covered Mrs. Johnson's high school chemistry class. Enter Kyle, a sophomore whose approach to chemistry could best be described as enthusiastically incorrect, and his partner Jessica, who believed every experiment needed artistic flair. The chaos began when Kyle, fresh from a YouTube binge of cool chemical reactions, decided the regular curriculum wasn't extreme enough. "Hey, if we mix everything in the supply cabinet together, do you think we could make a new element?" Before I could explain why that was a terrible idea, Jessica had already added her special touch, glitter. Yes, glitter. In a chemistry lab. The resulting mixture turned a color that probably doesn't exist in nature, while the glitter created a disco ball effect on the ceiling. Then it started making an ominous fizzing sound that definitely wasn't in my substitute teacher handbook. We evacuated just before their creation redecorated the ceiling with a Jackson Pollock-inspired pattern of glitter and chemicals. The cleanup crew said they'd never seen anything quite like it. The glitter had somehow bonded with the chemicals in a way that made it indestructible. To this day, room 237's ceiling still sparkles under the fluorescent lights, a glittering monument to why substitute teachers deserve hazard pay. The silver lining? Kyle and Jessica technically did create something new, just not a new element. Jessica even got into college with her essay, "The Day I Revolutionized Chemical Warfare with Glitter." Now I start every chemistry class with one rule: no glitter. Ever. I don't care if you think it will make the reaction more festive. Story 35, The Great Escape Artist. Meet Dave, my former roommate, who turned getting locked out of his bedroom into an exercise in creative physics. Instead of calling a locksmith like a normal person, Dave saw it as an opportunity to prove that the laws of physics were more like guidelines than actual rules. His attempts at entry started with percussive maintenance, shoulder-charging the door while yelling, "FBI, open up." This earned him nothing but a bruised shoulder and concerned texts from neighbors about potential federal raids. Undeterred, he tried tactical entry via alternative apertures, attempting to Spider-Man his way along our fourth-floor window ledge while pedestrians below took bets on his survival odds. The situation reached peak absurdity when Dave attempted to quantum tunnel through the wall by running at it repeatedly while quoting Schrödinger's equations. His reasoning: If particles can do it, why can't I? The only thing he quantum tunneled was his way into a mild concussion. His final desperate attempt involved what he called the thermal expansion method, using a hair dryer on the door handle while explaining complex thermodynamics to our increasingly concerned neighbors. After 5 hours of increasingly questionable physics experiments, he finally called a locksmith, only to discover his keys had been inside his room the whole time, next to a half-finished manuscript titled Alternative Approaches to Spatial Navigation, a revolutionary guide to entering locked spaces. These days, Dave works in IT security, which I find both hilarious and concerning. Sometimes I wonder if somewhere out there's a company's firewall being tested by someone attempting to quantum tunnel through it while wielding a rubber duck. Story 36, The Vegan Vigilante. Meet Rachel, whose commitment to veganism went far beyond dietary choice. It was a superhero origin story, if that superhero's power was turning every conversation into a lecture about cheese ethics. Her crusade began innocently with vegan brownies at team meetings, weapons of mass conversion that had the density of neutron stars and could probably be used as building materials. Her masterpiece was the Great Office Refrigerator Intervention of 2019. One Monday, we found the office fridge completely reorganized into zones of ethical awareness, with non-vegan items quarantined to the bottom shelf, each container labeled with carbon footprint estimates and sad animal face ratings. The break room became her battlefield, where she'd ambush people heating their morally questionable meals with impromptu TED Talks, complete with PowerPoint presentations stored on her phone. She even installed a conscience counter above the microwave that played a sad trombone sound whenever someone heated up meat, a mysterious device that even the IT department couldn't figure out how to disable. Her crusade met its match in Bob from accounting, who responded to her hour-long presentation on honey ethics by calmly unwrapping a bacon sandwich while maintaining direct eye contact. The final straw came when she proposed a break room cemetery with tiny tombstones for fallen meat products, complete with epitaphs like, "Here lies Bob's lunch. It died so that Bob's cholesterol could live." These days, Rachel works at a vegan startup, but her legacy lives on. I still catch myself apologizing to my chicken sandwich before taking a bite, and the microwave's beep still makes several people flinch reflexively. Story 37, The Spiritual Entrepreneur. Meet Linda, who turned spirituality into a metaphysical smoothie by blending religions and philosophies with the enthusiasm of someone operating a cosmic food processor without the lid. Her journey began with quantum crystal healing, taping craft store beads to her forehead while reciting multiplication tables backwards to align her chakras with the Fibonacci sequence of the universe. Her apartment was a spiritual theme park, with energy amplifiers ranging from religious symbols to 90s action figures. Batman has very powerful chakra alignment properties. The centerpiece was a meditation corner featuring a gold spray-painted lawn flamingo crowned with Christmas lights, allegedly channeling an ancient Egyptian cat goddess. Linda's masterpiece was founding Quantum Harmonic Spiritual Synergy, QHSS, a religion whose tenets changed weekly based on whatever History Channel documentary she'd half-watched. Her sacred text, the Quantum Prophecies, advised followers to rotate their consciousness 45 degrees counterclockwise while visualizing their spirit animal doing tax returns. The pinnacle came during her quantum spiritual retreat. 20 people crammed into her studio apartment while she waved an aluminum foil-covered TV remote, claiming it was an ancient artifact. The event climaxed with her demonstration of astral projection through interpretive dance, spinning in circles while reciting the periodic table to stay alive until her neighbors complained about someone having a science-themed disco party at 3 a.m. These days, Linda practices quantum financial alignment by taping crystals to her credit cards. Her bank statements suggest this needs fine-tuning, but she remains convinced that Bitcoin's value fluctuates based on Mercury's retrograde schedule. Story 38, The Conspiracy Theorist's Cat. Meet Tom, whose grip on reality was looser than a cat's commitment to staying off kitchen counters, and his ordinary tabby Mr. Whiskers, who Tom was convinced was a sophisticated government surveillance device. His evidence? The cat stared at him while he used his computer, shocking, and twitched its tail in what he insisted was Morse code. The paranoia peaked when he caught Mr. Whiskers playing with a laser pointer dot. Optical data transmission, he declared, apparently forgetting he'd bought the pointer himself. This led to him following his cat around with a homemade signal interceptor, fashioned from a colander and Christmas lights. Tom's counter-surveillance operations included speaking only in pig Latin when Mr. Whiskers was present, covering his windows with aluminum foil to block feline mind control frequencies, and wearing a copper wire hat to prevent his thoughts from being harvested by the cat's neural scanner. His magnum opus was Operation Catnip Counterintelligence, a detailed study of Mr. Whiskers' behavior before and after catnip exposure, complete with graphs plotting the surveillance activity coefficient from suspicious to highly suspicious. When the cat ignored his attempts at encrypted cat language and walked away to groom itself. Tom declared this, obviously a defense mechanism to avoid data interception. These days, Tom still checks his cat's collar for hidden microphones, while Mr. Whiskers continues his deep cover operation of sleeping in sunbeams and knocking things off tables. Or as Tom would say, exactly what a highly trained government operative would do. Story 39, The Amateur Astronomer. Meet Mike, whose enthusiasm for astronomy was matched only by his talent for misinterpreting everything in the night sky. Armed with a professional-grade telescope, bought from a guy in a parking lot, suspiciously sticky with peanut butter, Mike turned every celestial observation into a groundbreaking discovery. His first triumph came when he interrupted a community meeting to announce his discovery of the cosmic hamburger constellation, which turned out to be a smudge on his telescope lens from his snacking habits. Undeterred, he spent 3 weeks tracking Planet X, only to realize he'd been observing his own reflection in his apartment window. His revised theory? He himself might be a planet, explaining why people orbited around him at parties. They were actually just avoiding his astronomical monologues. Things escalated when he started his blog, Mike's Cosmic Revelations, where science meets imagination, but mostly imagination, featuring theories like quantum stellar flatulence causing the northern lights. His presentation to the local astronomy club about the moon being suspiciously more circular than necessary included photos that were mostly his thumb or lens flare, which he insisted showed clear signs of artificial geometric manipulation. The Homeowners Association finally intervened when Mike converted his front yard into an astronomical research station. Really just garden gnomes arranged in what he claimed was a precise replica of the Orion constellation, but looked more like a conga line of silver-painted lawn ornaments wearing tinfoil space helmets. These days, Mike runs a support group for misunderstood astronomical visionaries, still convinced that Pluto's demotion was clearly a cover-up. At least his enthusiasm got the neighborhood interested in astronomy, even if it was just to fact-check his latest discovery. Story 40, The DIY Disaster. Meet Chris, my college roommate whose approach to home improvement was less do-it-yourself and more destroy-it-yourself. His first masterpiece? Fixing a minor leak under the kitchen sink without turning off the water supply, because that was just a suggestion. The result was an impromptu indoor water park that he optimistically called a self-cleaning environment. His solution to the flood? We just need to add more drains. Which led to him drilling holes in our kitchen floor, apparently unconcerned that somewhere meant our downstairs neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Peterson still gives us the evil eye in the hallway. Chris's proudest achievement was his integrated smart home lighting solution, rewiring our entire apartment to be controlled by his old Nintendo controller. Turning on the kitchen light required the Konami code, up, up, down, down, left, right, be a start. And somehow our electricity bill ended up denominated in Mario coins. The ceiling fan installation was particularly memorable. Rejecting the manufacturer's instructions as guidelines written by people who lack vision, he mounted it using advanced aerospace principles, really just concerning amounts of duct tape and optimism. It stayed up for exactly 3.5 minutes before its controlled descent took a chunk of ceiling with it. The final straw was his passive heat recycling system, built from old computer fans, dryer ducts, and what I suspect was part of a George Foreman grill. The fire department was very understanding, though they did suggest Chris consider a different hobby. These days, he sticks to virtual home improvement games, much safer for everyone involved. Story 20, Rob's Notebook Nightmare. Meet Rob, a university student who is living proof that academic brilliance and common sense often exist in inverse proportion. While he could ace the most challenging exams, his navigation of everyday life was like watching a sitcom character stumble through a minefield of his own making. His magnum opus of misfortune revolved around a small notebook, his creative sanctuary where he jotted down ideas, poems, and notes for a screenplay he was drafting. One day, while doing his best Usain Bolt impression to catch a bus, he dropped this precious repository of his artistic aspirations. By the time he realized his loss, the notebook had already embarked on its own adventure. Fortune seemed to smile upon him when someone found the notebook and, using the contact information inside, sent him a text. However, this is where Rob's previous attempt at humor came back to haunt him with the fury of a Greek tragedy. You see, in the notebook's reward if found section, Rob had playfully written 100 pounds. A joke that the elderly gentleman who found it took with all the seriousness of a heart attack. The old man, channeling his inner contract lawyer, demanded the full reward money, steadfastly refusing to return the notebook without payment. Rob's attempts to explain that it was a joke, and that as a broke student he couldn't afford such a sum, fell on ears as deaf as they were determined. His friends, myself included, tried to reason with him, suggesting he bring a bottle of wine as a thank you gesture instead and stand firm on not paying the money. But when Rob went to collect the notebook, the situation reached new levels of absurdity. The old man refused the wine because he didn't drink and insisted on cold, hard cash. Rob, now trapped in a bizarre hostage negotiation of his own making, ended up compromising and paying the man £50 just to escape the situation. The cosmic punchline: on his way home, the bottle of wine, his rejected peace offering, broke in his backpack, creating a perfect storm of karma that soaked and destroyed both the rescued notebook and his phone. It was as if the universe itself was delivering a masterclass in ironic justice, complete with a wine-soaked epilogue. Story 21. The Delusional Dreamer. Meet Marcus, a self-proclaimed visionary whose grip on reality was about as firm as a politician's campaign promises. Working with him at the local movie theater was like having a front-row seat to a one-man show that blended comedy, drama, and pure fantasy in equal measure. Marcus wasn't content with merely being a regular employee. Oh no. In his mind, he was the chosen one, destined to revolutionize the entire movie theater industry. His magnum opus? The brilliant idea to bring back the ancient Coke machines that had been scrapped years ago. When informed that these relics had long since been recycled into scrap metal, he'd simply tap his temple knowingly and declare, "Just wait and see. I've seen it in my visions." But his delusions of grandeur didn't stop there. During the premiere of Justice League, Marcus arrived in what he claimed was a professionally crafted Superman costume that looked suspiciously like pajamas from Target with a bath towel cape. When 6 other moviegoers showed up in store-bought costumes, Marcus strutted around the lobby like a peacock in mating season, proudly proclaiming that he had started a worldwide cosplay movement. The fact that superhero costumes at comic book movie premieres had been a thing for decades somehow escaped his psychic awareness. His crowning moment of temporal confusion came during his first day of orientation. Scheduled for 5 p.m., Marcus waltzed in at 10 p.m., having walked across town because, and I quote, "I didn't think of leaving earlier." The concept of time management was clearly as foreign to him as the idea of cause and effect. That same week, he took what should have been a 15-minute break and vanished for 2 hours. When my co-worker finally tracked him down, his explanation was delivered with the serene confidence of a Zen master. I had a vision that the line would be long. The fact that he could have seen the actual line by simply looking through the window before deciding to spend his entire break there apparently didn't occur to him. But my personal favorite was his confident declaration about the original Jumanji movie. According to our resident film historian, it was supposed to be about a video game, but since video games hadn't been invented yet, they scratched the idea. When someone pointed out that video games had been around since the 1970s, he simply smiled and said, "That's what they want you to think." Who they were and why they would want to hide the invention date of video games remained a mystery that even his psychic powers couldn't unravel. The last I heard, Marcus had moved on to pursue his dream of becoming a professional psychic consultant to Hollywood. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, confidently predicting the return of obsolete vending machines and rewriting film history one misguided fact at a time. In a strange way, his unwavering confidence in his own alternate reality was almost admirable, like a ship's captain steering directly into an iceberg while insisting it's actually a tropical island. Story 22. The Pool Party Pandemonium. In what can only be described as a momentary lapse of judgment that would make Darwin question his entire theory of natural selection, I once accepted a job lifeguarding at a frat party. The pay was good, and I had just renewed my certifications, so I convinced myself that my professional training would somehow triumph over the inevitable chaos of drunk college students. Spoiler alert. It was like trying to use a paper umbrella in a hurricane. The star of this chlorinated catastrophe was a gentleman who I'll call Brad. Not because that was his name, but because he embodied every stereotype of a fraternity brother that Hollywood has ever conceived. Picture, if you will, a walking, talking amalgamation of every hold my beer moment you've ever witnessed, wrapped in board shorts and marinated in what I can only assume was every type of alcohol the local liquor store had on sale. Brad's evening began with what he probably thought was charming persistence, repeatedly offering me drinks while I was on duty. When I explained that alcohol and lifeguarding mix about as well as cats and water aerobics, he took this rejection as a personal challenge to his masculinity. His response: in a move that would make a WWE wrestler question their life choices, he decided to demonstrate his alpha male status by smashing an unopened beer can against his forehead. The result was exactly what any sober person would expect: a bleeding head wound that made him look less like a tough guy and more like an extra from a low-budget zombie movie. But Brad, bless his concussed heart, wasn't about to let a little thing like head trauma dampen his party spirit. With blood still trickling down his face like some macabre war paint, he let out a battle cry that would have made a Viking blush and executed what he probably thought was a graceful dive into the 6-foot pool. In reality, it looked more like a drunk penguin attempting parkour while wearing roller skates. My whistleblowing symphony fell on ears as deaf as a rock concert security guard's. Brad emerged from the pool, completely baffled by my concern for his safety. Instead of acknowledging his near-death experience, he switched tactics and attempted to flirt with me. Because nothing says date material quite like self-inflicted head trauma and a death wish. His pickup lines were about as smooth as sandpaper and twice as abrasive. The evening's grand finale came when Brad realized his precious Ray-Bans had abandoned ship during one of his aquatic misadventures. His solution? Demand that we drain the entire Olympic-sized pool immediately to recover his $200 sunglasses. When I pointed out the logistical impossibility of this request, he suggested an alternative. He would hold his breath and search the bottom of the pool himself. Remember, this was the same person who moments ago could barely walk in a straight line on dry land. For 3 hours, I watched this walking liability provide a masterclass in poor decision-making, enthusiastically encouraged by his equally inebriated fraternity brothers. Each time I prevented one potential disaster, Brad would innovate a new way to tempt fate. It was like playing a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole where the moles were all drunk and determined to drown. His friends, meanwhile, treated each near-death experience as prime entertainment, cheering him on with all the wisdom of people betting on which raindrop will reach the bottom of the window first. The experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, no amount of hazard pay is worth watching someone try to turn a pool party into an episode of 1,000 Ways to Die. Second, when someone warns you about lifeguarding at a fraternity party, believe them. Some warnings don't need to be learned firsthand. And finally, there's apparently no limit to human ingenuity when it comes to finding new ways to ignore basic safety protocols. As I left that night, watching Brad attempt to convince his friends that his head wound made him look totally badass, I couldn't help but wonder if this was what the inventor of the lifeguard certification had in mind when they created the program. Something tells me they probably didn't include a section on handling drunk fraternity brothers trying to turn a swimming pool into their personal X Games venue. Story 23. The Great Apartment Siege. What began as a routine landlord-tenant dispute quickly spiraled into a theatrical production that would have made Shakespeare's tragedies look like light-hearted comedies. The curtain rose on this absurdist drama with a phone call from my landlord, who apparently believed that legal contracts were more like friendly suggestions than binding agreements. His demand? I needed to vacate my apartment immediately because his precious cousin needed a place to stay. When I politely reminded him about the small matter of my legally binding lease with 6 months remaining, he reacted as if I'd suggested we sacrifice his firstborn to the gods of real estate. Enter our antagonist. The cousin, a man whose understanding of tenant rights was about as developed as a fish's appreciation for bicycle maintenance. His dramatic debut involved letting himself into my apartment unannounced, because apparently, in his world, a lease was just a piece of paper and privacy was an optional luxury. When I suggested that he might want to familiarize himself with tenant rights law or face a conversation with law enforcement, he stormed out like a toddler denied candy at the grocery store. But this was just the opening act of our little drama. Anticipating further theatrical performances, I had the locks changed. Sure enough, our wannabe method actor decided to escalate things by kicking in a window and breaking into the apartment. Because nothing says I have a right to be here quite like committing a felony. I was home at the time, and hearing the commotion that sounded like a rhinoceros attempting ballet, immediately dialed 911. In a move that would have made any criminal defense lawyer weep, he grabbed the phone from me mid-call and started yelling at the operator. Yes, you read that correctly. He decided that the best way to avoid legal trouble was to add assault and interfering with an emergency call to his growing list of crimes, all while literally on the phone with the police. When I pointed out that this situation was going to look fantastic, when the police arrived to find him holding my phone in an apartment he'd just broken into, he eventually put it down. But the story doesn't end there. In a twist worthy of M. Night Shyamalan, he decided to call the police himself. I thanked him for his contribution, noting that multiple 911 calls from the same location would only expedite the response time. The drama reached its crescendo when his girlfriend, or sister, their relationship status was as clear as mud, and my girlfriend started their own heated debate about property rights and common decency. The result were simultaneous 911 calls, creating what must have been an interesting day at the emergency dispatch center. When 6 to 8 officers arrived with weapons drawn, they were treated to the sight of the cousin still insisting that his uncle said he could live there, as if these magic words would somehow negate breaking and entering charges. The look on the officers' faces was priceless, a perfect blend of disbelief and resignation that seemed to say, "We don't get paid enough for this." After showing the police my lease and ID, I thought the final curtain had fallen on this theatrical disaster. But no, the landlord decided to add his own dramatic flourish by shutting off the power and water. After consulting with a lawyer about my rights, I decided that living without heat or running water in the middle of winter, with a broken window and damaged door, wasn't worth the principle of the thing. My exit strategy: I moved out quickly, skipped the last month's rent, didn't clean, and left the fridge full of rotting food. The piece de resistance was a particularly ripe turkey that I'd left to mature like a fine wine. The resulting aroma was my parting gift, a small revenge for a large inconvenience, delivered with all the subtlety of a skunk at a garden party. Story 24. The Chemistry Lab Catastrophe. During my third year of chemistry studies, I witnessed an incident that would have made Marie Curie roll over in her, probably still radioactive, grave. The star of our show was titanium tetrachloride, TCl4, a substance so reactive with water that it makes a teenager's mood swings look stable by comparison. When exposed to even the slightest hint of moisture, this temperamental compound throws a tantrum that would put any 2-year-old to shame, producing hydrochloric acid and clouds of toxic gas that could clear a room faster than a bad karaoke performance. Our lab protocols were crystal clear and about as flexible as a drill sergeant with a migraine. Full protective gear, specialized containers, and strict confinement to the fume hood. But as in any good disaster story, there's always that one person who treats safety protocols like optional suggestions on a cereal box. Enter our protagonist, a student whose confidence in his intellectual superiority was inversely proportional to his actual competence. Let's call him Einstein Jr., a young man who apparently believed that his self-proclaimed genius granted him immunity from basic chemistry laws. In a moment of inspiration that would have made Darwin question his entire theory of natural selection, Einstein Jr. decided that the proper place to open a bottle of TCl4 was right at his workstation, treating this highly volatile compound with all the casual disregard of someone opening a bottle of spring water. The results were as immediate as they were spectacular. Dense white clouds began billowing upward like an angry genie escaping its bottle after a millennium of imprisonment. The rational response at this point would have been to quickly reseal the container and admit defeat. But our hero, demonstrating the decision-making skills of a lemming with a death wish, chose instead to channel his inner quarterback and throw the bottle. The bottle, unsurprisingly, did what bottles tend to do when thrown. It broke. The spilled TCl4 vaporized instantly, creating a toxic fog bank that would have made a Hollywood special effects team jealous. The resulting chaos looked like a cross between a disaster movie and a particularly aggressive fog machine malfunction. The entire building had to be evacuated, with students and faculty fleeing like extras in a Godzilla movie. The emergency response team that arrived looked like they were preparing for a chemical warfare scenario, complete with hazmat suits and breathing apparatus. Meanwhile, Einstein Jr. stood outside, coughing and trying to explain to increasingly unamused authority figures that he thought it would be fine. A week later, the lab still retained the distinctive aroma of hydrochloric acid, a lingering reminder of our brush with chemical chaos. The smell had embedded itself into the very fabric of the building, like a persistent ghost haunting the halls of scientific hubris. Unsurprisingly, Einstein Jr. never returned to the course. Whether this was due to expulsion or a sudden realization that perhaps chemistry wasn't his calling remains a mystery, though I suspect it was less of a career choice and more of a strongly worded suggestion from the department. The incident has since become a cautionary tale in our department, told to new students as a warning about the importance of safety protocols. It serves as a perfect example of how confidence without competence is about as useful as a chocolate teapot, and potentially far more dangerous. Story 25. The Biology Student's Pregnancy Panic. In college, I had a friend whose moments of intellectual vacancy were so profound they could have been studied as black holes in the universe of common sense. What makes this tale particularly rich is that she was studying to become a science teacher, a career path she has, somewhat alarmingly, since successfully pursued. I often wonder how many future generations will be blessed with her unique interpretation of biological processes. The saga began after what could generously be described as a PG-13 encounter with a young man who, it's crucial to note, had only used his hands in their interaction. However, my friend's imagination proved to be far more fertile than any biological possibility. She managed to convince herself that he might have had some residual genetic material on his hands from a theoretical prior activity, which could have somehow found its way to its intended destination through what I can only imagine she believed was some sort of microscopic postal service. Her anxiety spiral reached heights that would have made a NASA engineer dizzy. She began speculating about his pre-encounter activities with the investigative fervor of a conspiracy theorist uncovering government secrets. The panic reached such a fever pitch that she actually went to get the morning after pill, apparently believing that sperm cells had evolved the ability to survive a journey that would make Marco Polo's expeditions look like a trip to the corner store. But the true masterpiece of this comedy of errors came when, worried about the potential side effects of the completely unnecessary morning after pill, she decided to confess the entire situation to her parents. Yes, you read that correctly. She voluntarily told her conservative parents about a non-existent pregnancy scare based on a scenario that would have made even the writers of science fiction blush. Picture this: a grown woman, studying to teach science to impressionable young minds, sitting down with her parents to explain how she might be pregnant because a boy touched her with hands that may or may not have contained genetic material from an entirely different activity at an entirely different time. The resulting lecture about promiscuity was both entirely unnecessary and hilariously misplaced, given the actual level of intimacy involved. The cosmic irony of this situation continues to boggle my mind. This person is now responsible for teaching young minds about biology and reproductive science. Sometimes I lie awake at night, imagining her explaining to a classroom full of teenagers that babies can be conceived through a complex system of hand delivery, like some sort of reproductive postal service. I can only hope that somewhere along the line, someone gave her a refresher course in basic human reproduction. The silver lining? At least she's living proof that you don't need to understand how babies are made to successfully avoid making them. Though I suspect that has more to do with luck than knowledge. Story 26. The clay-loving anti-vaxxer. I once worked with a French-Italian gentleman who approached scientific reasoning with all the precision of a drunk flamingo attempting ballet. This man, let's call him Giorgio, was a walking encyclopedia of conspiracy theories, each more outlandish than the last. He was militantly anti-vaccine, deeply invested in government cover-ups, and swore by homeopathy with the fervor of a televangelist at a miracle healing session. But Giorgio's crown jewel of alternative medicine wasn't some exotic herb or rare crystal. It was clay. Yes, ordinary clay, the kind you might use for pottery class. In his mind, this humble earth material possessed healing powers that would make Wolverine's regenerative abilities look like a band-aid. He spoke about clay with such reverence. You'd think it was a gift from ancient aliens rather than something you could dig up in your backyard. His moment of glory came during his family's time in Denmark, where they faced a common parental dilemma. Their son needed basic vaccinations to enroll in kindergarten. After much resistance and reluctant compliance, they finally got the boy vaccinated. But Giorgio wasn't about to let Big Pharma have the last laugh. No, he had a master plan that would have made any conspiracy theorist proud. The moment they left the doctor's office, our modern-day alchemist peeled off the bandage from his son's arm and, with the triumphant flourish of a magician revealing his greatest trick, slapped a generous glob of clay on the injection site. In his mind, the clay would act like some sort of mystical vaccine vacuum cleaner, sucking out the evil medicine from his son's bloodstream like a detox smoothie for the skin. His explanation of how this worked was a masterpiece of pseudoscientific word salad. According to Giorgio's unique interpretation of biology, which seemed to be based equally on medieval medicine and science fiction, the clay would draw out the toxins through some sort of osmotic process that apparently ignored everything we know about how vaccines, blood circulation, and basic physics work. The beautiful irony of this situation was that his profound misunderstanding of basic biology actually ensured his son received the full benefit of the vaccines. While he smugly celebrated his victory over modern medicine, the vaccines were already doing their job, completely unaffected by his clay-based countermeasures. It was perhaps the perfect example of how sometimes the greatest stupidity can accidentally serve the greater good. In his mind, he had successfully unvaccinated his son and outsmarted the entire medical establishment. In reality, he had simply given his child an impromptu mud bath while the vaccines went about their business, protecting his son despite his father's best efforts to the contrary. The clay eventually dried and fell off, leaving behind nothing but a dirty shirt and a father's misplaced sense of triumph. The last time I saw Giorgio, he was enthusiastically explaining to anyone who would listen about his plans to market clay as a vaccine neutralizer on the alternative medicine circuit. I sometimes wonder if he ever succeeded in his clay crusade, or if perhaps he's moved on to other substances, maybe sand for curing the common cold, or gravel for treating indigestion. After all, in the world of alternative medicine, the sky's the limit, and apparently, so is human gullibility. Story 27. The Movie Theater Mystic. Let me tell you about Kevin, a self-proclaimed psychic whose connection to reality was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Working with him at the local movie theater was like having a front-row seat to an ongoing performance art piece that blended delusion, drama, and unintentional comedy in equal measure. Kevin's most remarkable trait was his unwavering belief in his own psychic abilities, which manifested in predictions that were about as accurate as a chocolate sundial. His proudest premonition centered around the return of our ancient Coke machines, relics that had been scrapped for parts years before he even joined our staff. When informed that these machines had long since been recycled into scrap metal, he'd simply tap his temple with a knowing smile and declare, "The spirits have shown me their return." I'm still waiting for those spirits to explain the logistics of reassembling machines that had probably already been reincarnated as Toyota parts. His delusions of grandeur reached new heights during the premiere of Justice League. Kevin arrived in what he claimed was a professionally crafted Superman costume that looked suspiciously like pajamas from Target with a bath towel cape. When 6 other moviegoers showed up in store-bought costumes, Kevin strutted around the lobby like a peacock who'd just invented feathers, proudly proclaiming that he had started a worldwide cosplay movement. The fact that people had been dressing up for movie premieres since before he was born somehow escaped his psychic awareness. Time management was another concept that existed in a different dimension for Kevin. His first day of orientation was scheduled for 5 p.m., but he sauntered in at 10 p.m., having walked across town because, and I quote, "I didn't think of leaving earlier." When asked why he didn't call for a ride or take a bus, he explained that he had sensed it would be a nice day for a walk. Apparently, his psychic powers didn't extend to basic planning skills or weather forecasting, as it had been raining for the past 3 hours. Later that week, he transformed what should have been a 15-minute break into an epic 2-hour odyssey. When my coworker finally tracked him down, his explanation was delivered with the serene confidence of a Zen master. I had a vision that the line would be long. The fact that he could have seen the actual line by simply looking through the window before deciding to spend his entire break there apparently didn't occur to him. But my personal favorite was his confident declaration about the original Jumanji movie. According to our resident film historian, it was supposed to be about a video game, but since video games hadn't been invented yet, they scratched the idea. When someone pointed out that video games had been around since the 1970s, he simply smiled and said, "That's what they want you to think." Who they were and why they would want to hide the invention date of video games remained a mystery that even his psychic powers couldn't unravel. The last time I saw Kevin, he was explaining to a bewildered customer how he had psychically predicted the ending of a movie he hadn't seen yet, a feat somewhat undermined by the fact that he'd been working at the theater for 3 months and had already seen it twice. He since moved on to pursue his dream of becoming a professional psychic consultant to Hollywood, though I suspect his greatest contribution to the film industry will remain his unintentionally comedic interpretations of movie history. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, confidently predicting the return of obsolete vending machines and rewriting film history one misguided fact at a time. Though I have to admit, in a world where reality often seems stranger than fiction, perhaps Kevin was just ahead of his time, or behind it, or sideways to it. With Kevin, it was always hard to tell. Story 28, The Fraternity Pool Fiasco. In what can only be described as a momentary lapse of judgment that would make Darwin question his entire theory of natural selection, I once accepted a job lifeguarding at a fraternity party. The pay was good, and I had just renewed my certifications, so I convinced myself that my professional training would somehow triumph over the inevitable chaos of drunk college students. Spoiler alert, it was like trying to use a paper umbrella in a hurricane. The star of this chlorinated catastrophe was a gentleman who I'll call Brad, not because that was his name, but because he embodied every stereotype of a fraternity brother that Hollywood has ever conceived. Picture, if you will, a walking, talking amalgamation of every hold my beer moment you've ever witnessed, wrapped in board shorts and marinated in what I can only assume was every type of alcohol the local liquor store had on sale. Brad's evening began with what he probably thought was charming persistence, repeatedly offering me drinks while I was on duty. When I explained that alcohol and lifeguarding mix about as well as cats and water aerobics, he took this rejection as a personal challenge to his masculinity. His response, in a move that would make a WWE wrestler question their life choices, he decided to demonstrate his alpha male status by smashing an unopened beer can against his forehead. The result was exactly what any sober person would expect. A bleeding head wound that made him look less like a tough guy and more like an extra from a low-budget zombie movie. But Brad, bless his concussed heart, wasn't about to let a little thing like head trauma dampen his party spirit. With blood still trickling down his face like some macabre war paint, he let out a battle cry that would have made a Viking blush and executed what he probably thought was a graceful dive into the 6-foot pool. In reality, it looked more like a drunk penguin attempting parkour while wearing roller skates. My whistleblowing symphony fell on ears as deaf as a rock concert security guards. Brad emerged from the pool, completely baffled by my concern for his safety. Instead of acknowledging his near-death experience, he switched tactics and attempted to flirt with me. Because nothing says date material quite like self-inflicted head trauma and a death wish. His pickup lines were about as smooth as sandpaper and twice as abrasive. The evening's grand finale came when Brad realized his precious Ray-Bans had abandoned ship during one of his aquatic misadventures. His solution? Demand that we drain the entire Olympic-sized pool immediately to recover his $200 sunglasses. When I pointed out the logistical impossibility of this request, he suggested an alternative. He would hold his breath and search the bottom of the pool himself. Remember, this was the same person who moments ago could barely walk in a straight line on dry land. For 3 hours, I watched this walking liability provide a masterclass in poor decision-making, enthusiastically encouraged by his equally inebriated fraternity brothers. Each time I prevented one potential disaster, Brad would innovate a new way to tempt fate. It was like playing a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole where the moles were all drunk and determined to drown. His friends, meanwhile, treated each near-death experience as prime entertainment, cheering him on with all the wisdom of people betting on which raindrop will reach the bottom of the window first. The experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, no amount of hazard pay is worth watching someone try to turn a pool party into an episode of 1,000 Ways to Die. Second, when someone warns you about lifeguarding at a fraternity party, believe them. Some warnings don't need to be learned firsthand. And finally, there's apparently no limit to human ingenuity when it comes to finding new ways to ignore basic safety protocols. As I left that night, watching Brad attempt to convince his friends that his head wound made him look totally badass, I couldn't help but wonder if this was what the inventor of the lifeguard certification had in mind when they created the program. Something tells me they probably didn't include a section on handling drunk fraternity brothers trying to turn a swimming pool into their personal X Games venue. Story 29, The Financial Guru's Folly. Meet Roy, a self-proclaimed financial wizard whose approach to money management was about as sound as using a chocolate teapot. Roy had developed his own unique brand of economics, a system so spectacularly misguided it deserved its own chapter in financial horror stories, right between setting money on fire for warmth and investing your life savings in magic beans. One day, he turned to me and a fellow crew member with the air of a sage about to impart ancient wisdom. "You boys want to know how to get nice things?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with the confidence of someone who had discovered the secret to unlimited wealth, but had somehow missed the concept of consequences. His master plan? Go to the store and finance everything: furniture, appliances, TVs, stereos, everything. Then don't make any payments and skip your court date. They'll garnish your wages, but they take way less than the payments would have been. The logic was so beautifully flawed it was like watching someone try to cure a hangover by getting drunk again. It was financial advice that would make Dave Ramsey spontaneously combust. But wait, there's more. A week later, Roy shared his revolutionary strategy for home ownership, delivered with the enthusiasm of a late-night infomercial host who'd had too much coffee. The plan was brilliantly simple in its absurdity. Apply for every credit card you can get, take out the maximum cash advance from all of them, use that for your down payment, then don't make any payments and skip your court date. It was like watching someone play Jenga with their credit score. Except instead of carefully removing pieces, Roy was suggesting taking a sledgehammer to the whole tower. His financial planning had all the foresight of a lemming leading a motivational seminar on cliff diving. The beauty of his system, according to Roy, was that it was basically free money, a concept that would have made economists throughout history simultaneously facepalm. He delivered his advice with the serene confidence of a chess master explaining why it's actually brilliant to sacrifice your queen on the first move. His theories about credit scores were particularly fascinating. He seemed to view them less as important financial indicators and more like high school grades, something that only matters until you decide it doesn't. Once it hits zero, he explained with the wisdom of a man who'd never tried to rent an apartment, it can't go any lower, so you're basically winning. For those wondering about Roy's eventual fate, I last spotted him about a decade ago in a small hamlet in Saskatchewan. Picture this: a man in his early 50s, sporting what can only be described as a magnificent gray-blonde skullet. That's a skull mullet for the uninitiated. Living his best life with all the carefree abandon of someone who had never heard of compound interest. He had evolved into his final form, a financial guru whose life was a testament to the principle that if you ignore your problems long enough, they become someone else's problems. His strategies weren't just thinking outside the box. They were throwing the box into a wood chipper and using the remains to file a fraudulent insurance claim. Sometimes I wonder if Roy is still out there, dispensing his unique brand of financial advice to unsuspecting listeners, his skullet flowing majestically in the prairie wind as he explains his latest theory about how bankruptcy is just a state of mind. His legacy lives on as a cautionary tale in the annals of personal finance, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable financial advice is knowing exactly what not to do. Story 30, The Flat Earth Financial Advisor. Meet James, a man who managed to turn debt dodging into an Olympic sport while simultaneously maintaining a worldview that would have made medieval scholars seem progressive. His approach to both finance and physics was unique, to say the least. Imagine someone trying to balance their checkbook while insisting that gravity is just a theory and that the earth is as flat as his credit score. His financial management style was a masterpiece of creative accounting. Debt collectors had become such regular features in his life that they'd practically earned honorary family member status. They'd call so often that his ringtone should have been "Another One Bites the Dust." His credit score had plummeted to depths that would make a deep-sea submarine feel inadequate, achieved through what can only be described as a determined commitment to fiscal irresponsibility. But James's real talent lay in his ability to simultaneously maintain financial chaos while developing increasingly elaborate theories about the shape of our planet. His expertise in high school mechanics class had led him to conclusions that would have made Isaac Newton not just turn in his grave, but probably attempt to escape it entirely. According to James's unique interpretation of physics, rockets couldn't work in space because there's no air to push against. A theory he explained with the confidence of someone who had personally tested this hypothesis. His astronomical calculations were equally impressive. The sun, he assured anyone who would listen, and many who would prefer not to, was a mere 6,000 miles away, a distance he had apparently determined through a complex series of calculations involving his thumb, the horizon, and what I can only assume was a heavy dose of creative mathematics. The atmosphere, he explained, must be contained in some sort of cosmic pressure vessel, or it would float away. A theory that somehow managed to misunderstand both gravity and the concept of floating simultaneously. But his crowning moment of scientific brilliance came during a particularly heated debate about the Earth's rotation. Standing in the middle of a parking lot, he executed what he clearly believed was a devastating demonstration of his theory. He jumped up and down, declaring triumphantly, "The Earth is rotating? Then why isn't it moving under my feet?" At that moment, I found myself wishing it had, preferably at escape velocity. His theories about technology were equally fascinating. Computers, according to James's unique understanding, learn tasks by playing YouTube videos in their brains, a concept that somehow managed to misunderstand both computers and brains in one elegant swoop. His master plan involved discovering Tesla's lost blueprints to invent something revolutionary in his backyard, despite struggling with the complex engineering challenge of assembling a bookshelf from IKEA. The cherry on top of this intellectual sundae? He claimed he could definitively prove the Earth was flat, but he was too busy taking his daughter swimming on Sundays to actually do so.